Thank you so much, Dr. Frieden. It's really a delight to be here. Let me make sure I figure out how this works. There we go. There we go. Yeah. I don't have any current financial conflicts, but in the last 24 months I did. So, being at Sages, talking about routine video recording is kind of like bringing coals to Newcastle. And frankly, I look around the room and I look at this panel and I see people who have created the foundational research to demonstrate the importance of surgical video. And so it's a very special honor for me to be talking to this group. So what's special about surgical recording? It really comes down to what's special about surgical ethics, the same sort of principles. The patients anesthetized, they don't know what's going on, and they're only, as Dr. Fried mentioned, their only sort of knowledge of that is the debrief for the post-op note, this post hoc recollection by the surgeon. And suddenly video provides this opportunity for the patient to know sort of objectively, firsthand, what happened to them while they were asleep. And the other thing that's important is that surgery is a big deal, right? It's an irreversible act. It's a major intervention. It's not something small. And so by distinction, if we think about debates about routine recording of the preoperative conversation, which is an active debate and a meaningful debate, well, you can certainly go back and amend any misconceptions. You can, have the conversation again. There's nothing irreversible about that conversation. And the patient's awake and present for that conversation, so there should be no surprises after the fact about any of those recordings. Well, not so with surgical video, and that's why it has this important concept. So we got a group together in May of last year, ethicists, legal scholars, surgeons, nurses, anesthesiologists, to talk about surgical recording, and specifically about the barriers to routine recording. And when we're talking about this, of course, we're not talking about administrative data or vitals or anything that's routinely part of the medical record. But we're also not just talking about procedural video. And I make that distinction because this panel is more about procedural video. But we also considered during the conference whole room video, audio, and special sensor recording of the surgical team. And the challenges that I'm going to talk about here are in the context of all of those different types of recording, even though I kind of focus on procedural video. So this is to remind me that there were 7 deadly challenges to routine recording when we opened the black box of the operating room. So the first is the elephant in the room, right? Medical legal. Of course, this is the primary concern that physicians and hospitals raise when they think about this data being recorded. And what's interesting about this is there's some legitimate concerns. First of all, video and other recordings of medical aspects is relatively untested in the courts. There have been very few cases where they've admitted this as evidence. So we don't know how it's going to be treated as evidence, what rules are going to be around it, and I think that's going to evolve over time. And then secondly, I think there's this realistic dream that having objective recording of the operating room would allow for a medical malpractice reform. You would have a clear sign, is this a negligence or not? And so therefore you could decrease the cost of litigation, frivolous cases wouldn't be brought forward. But there are some problems with that. So first of all, we don't have really clear standards about what you're supposed to see in a video. I mean, the notable counterexample is critical view of safety. But in many cases, we don't know what we're supposed to be seeing. So there could be some debate about whether this is appropriate or not. And we haven't even categorized all the variations of surgery. And then furthermore, there are certainly going to be cases where the video is open to interpretation by 2 different experts. So it may not be providing us the objective panacea that we're hoping for. Additionally, there's this concept of peer review, right? We collect the videos under peer review. It's protected from legal discovery, great. Well, one, the amount of protection of peer review is dependent on state law or on international law, depending on, where you are, and also on the purpose. If you're recording this and then you want to learn something from it, you want to teach other surgeons how to do surgery or how to avoid errors, suddenly you're doing research. And then that's maybe not so much QI, and that's research data which patients may legitimately have a claim to, their own research data. There's also this concern of, okay, you do peer review and maybe you have it eat its tail and you delete the videos after, 30 days. There is some concern about evidentiary spoilage, the idea that you're deleting some evidence that could be used later in a court case. And the rules around that and how that might be treated are unclear, so it's not certain that would be a protection. And so what this ultimately gets to is there's going to be many potential pathways for patients to have access to the videos of their procedures. And so we stop for a minute and say, okay, well, why do we care if patients have access? I mean, if there's an error on the video, you're supposed to disclose the error anyways. Maybe it can help you disclose it better. And very well-meaning surgeons, very ethical, well-meaning, thoughtful surgeons are still concerned about patients seeing these videos. And so it's not about errors. It's not about seeing problems. It's about something else. And what I think that is this disconnect between patient expectations and surgical realities. No one wants to know how sausage is made, right? And so the realities of the OR, the minor errors, seeing bleeding, seeing sort of performance that isn't as symphonic and elegant as we might like it to be, and also team care, trainees participating. You could imagine a scenario where a very well-meaning family member reviews a video of a patient who even has a good outcome and gets concerned by the things they see, and that is going to merit some kind of explanation or could cause some concern. And I recognize this is a videoscopic meeting, and I do mostly open surgery. It's a videoscopic meeting, but if you think that the views of the tips of the instruments is not going to show trainee participation, we know that algorithms are already savvy enough to pick up differences in performance in different operators, even based on how the endoscopic instruments are moving. And CSATs demonstrated that that's in fact something you can crowdsource. A layperson can look at it and see the difference between good performance and poor performance. So it's possible that that would be evident even to a patient in a video. So if patients are to have access to videos, there's a couple things that need to happen. One, we need to set some expectations, right, ahead of time, and then be prepared to make explanations afterwards, that this is what you saw, this is what's happening here. And that's a very time-consuming proposition, and we need to find a way to streamline that. Furthermore, when you think about consent, you got to talk about this, that this is going to, we're going to record it, there's going to be this video, and you got to prepare patients for that expectation and maybe some of the blood and gore or other things that they may see at a time when they're facing a major life event and they're scared. And so we need to figure out how to manage the consent process in that way. We need to talk about the potential uses for those video data. And we have to be prepared to talk about other aspects of surgical care that may be revealed by that video, such as trainee participation. And so ultimately what the goal is, we need to find good messaging for patients, something that's truthful, but reassuring. And also take this on as an opportunity. This is a way to talk about surgical video in a very positive light. We're committed to safety. This hospital is committed to safety. That's why we're recording our videos. We're the Super Bowl NFL team that's going to have a perfect game, and that's why you want to come here. And so I think there is an opportunity to message this in a very positive light. Okay, so ownership. Many potential stakeholders for these videos. And, the surgeon and their team, it's their performance. The patient, it's their body. The hospital housed the event, the payer paid for it, and then these other companies, sort of were involved somehow in the recording or the analysis. And any may have legitimate claims. And so when we talk about ownership, we say who has control over the use of these videos. And it's important to note that HIPAA only protects, healthcare entities, payers and business associates. So once it gets out of that realm in the patient's hands or in, outside a HIPAA-covered entity, then it no longer has that protection. And so we need to think about what protection should be in place from a policy standpoint. And what are these implications? Well, one, surgical videos could contain intellectual property. You could, some surgeons feel like their techniques are trade secrets in some way, or, you could be developing some kind of new method or procedure that's important and may have value in some way. You could imagine commercial uses for these videos, from advertising to coaching or training. You heard it here first, but I could imagine a particularly notable video getting turned into an NFT and auctioned, and then who should get the proceeds from that, right? Or you could imagine companies entering this space from a patient-facing standpoint, saying, we'll analyze your surgical video for you and tell you how good your surgery was. Or we'll tell the plaintiff's attorney how good your surgery was. And so there's going to be these business opportunities there, and it's unclear who's going to get to capitalize on that. And then, of course, most importantly, as we think about ownership design, we need to, of course, have the patient's privacy at primacy, but also the surgical team's privacy is important. And that brings us to privacy, another important challenge. So, of course, we haven't determined good standards for de-identification. That's a key milestone. We, of course, have to have the patient protections, but we also have to think about the surgical team. Their performance is being recorded. If it's a whole room video, their faces or other activities or conversations are being recorded. And so we have to ask, do surgical teams, because of what they're doing, they're caring for these patients, they have a special right by society to be able to perform surgery. Do they have an expectation of privacy in the workplace? And how do we support that one way or another? And could recording become a condition of employment or not? And these are unanswered questions. And this is the worry, right? Big brother watching over us, watching what we do, stressing out the surgical team. And in fact, that's another big challenge. Thinking about the impact on the surgical team. We don't want people performing for the camera. We just want them doing their routine good work. We want to introduce recording in a positive rather than a punitive manner. We want to figure out ahead of time how these videos should or should not be used for things like promotion or privileges or censure. We need to maintain the professional autonomy, celebrate the variations between surgeons and what works better in some hands versus others, and also maintain that kind of privileged team experience where people have a good time in the OR enjoying their work. Hospitals have some duties here that are at this point undefined. So if the videos don't go to the electronic medical record, how should they be stored? How should they be protected? What's the retention policy? And this gets back to the spoilage question earlier. How should videos be used in sentinel event review, and what happens to them once they enter that pathway? And then also, are hospitals sort of obligated to do active surveillance on these videos to detect patterns ahead of time for prevention? So you can imagine if you're getting an uptick of certain infections, the hospital is supposed to recognize that. They're supposed to put procedures in place to prevent those and minimize those infections. The same concept could be applied to surgical videos where they're noticing certain patterns of complications or near misses. Good. And so last is sort of a sticky issue, but the idea of justice, right? The justice is classically an equal share of the benefits and burdens, right? But the risks and burdens of surgical video are not yet well defined. And so you can imagine various ways of injustice that could happen. So one is certain populations are recorded more than others. Maybe only the teaching service gets recorded, or maybe only the fancy service gets recorded. And when you're recording in certain populations only and applying algorithms to all, as we begin to use video to sort of feed back, performance improvement to the operating room, are you going to unfairly bias one group versus another? Are the algorithms even going to be as effective for one group versus another? And then this last point is a bit nuanced, but when we think about surgical video, if it's out there, that's necessarily increasing transparency about operating room activities. And we have to be careful because transparency favors the medically savvy and the empowered. So if you know, for instance, that surgical residents are going to be involved in your case and you don't want residents involved, and this is a classic question that surgeons get asked at teaching institutions, no residents for me, right? Well, if you acquiesce to those, an increase in transparency sort of favors those patients who may feel like they can ask for that in some way. Although I'll make the argument that, in fact, non-resident care disfavors them, but that's a whole other discussion. But the point is that we have to be prepared, if we have increased transparency, to have a standard way of doing things. We don't make variations and changes on what we do just based on how patients are asking us to change. That benefits them, and it's an important standpoint for justice. So, coming out of this meeting, what did we figure out was the goal of routine recording? Realizing the benefits, of course, while minimizing the harms. That's obvious. But the other thing that came out of the meeting was really finding out a way for adequate access to videos for patients. We really seemed to, the group didn't really seem to come down on the side of we should make sure we obfuscate these videos. We don't want patients to have them. But rather, let's find an appropriate way for patients to access that aspect of medical data in a way that protects all. So, we're going to wrestle with this, much like law enforcement, aviation, nuclear power, and other surveillance-based industries have done. And we will, come out on the other side, I think, a stronger profession because of it. As a last point, please go to this website, surgicalrecording.org. All the videos from the conference are posted there. You can hear the experts talking about these topics in much more detail than I could provide today. And you can sign up for our mailing list to get more information as these topics evolve. So thank you.